Good morning, you hear me? So I'm Christopher von Betzen, I'm from Verisec, and I'm going to tell you a quite exciting story about the Verisec labs and how our operations in Serbia started. It all started on a sunny morning in January in 2009 in the town of Salford in the greater Manchester area in England. At a hotel, three enthusiastic entrepreneurs from Sweden were having breakfast, really excited about this meeting they were going to have later that day. They were going to present a revolutionizing concept for digital identities for Salford City Council. And at this time, most of the digital identities and authentication at UK councils were in the hands of IT giants like RSA and SafeNet, that you probably know about. But our three friends from Sweden, they had a vision of something much better, and a vision of a digital identity on an internet scale. Instead of looking at user groups of hundreds and thousands, they were thinking about digital identities on a scale of millions. And there was also another problem with the giants. They had the proprietary model with quite heavy cost per user, which made their solutions very expensive. And our three guys from Sweden, they knew they could do better, and they were going to Salford City Council to present this idea. There was only one big problem. They didn't have anything to present. They only had the concept, and they were so convinced that they could create greatness anyway. So this was Johan Henriksson, Dragic Nesic, or Nesha as we call him, and Anders Henriksson, sitting at the hotel, and Johan said, well, at least we got to have a name when we go to sell this product. That's a good start. That's a good point, the others said. Do you have any suggestions? Well, what about Freya, the Nordic mythology goddess? Why Freya? Well, why not? And then there was a much more important question that Anders raised to Nesha, and Nesha being the architect and the technical whiz kid behind the whole concept and the architecture. He said, what about the time frame? Because Salford City Council had indicated in the conversations that if you can provide such a brilliant solution that you're talking about, we are prepared to place an order with you. But we needed to be up and running in April. And this was January, so about 3.5 months later they would have to put up with a live, fully functioning solution. And Nesha, who has long experience of developing groundbreaking innovations within IT security, he just looked at the guys and smiled and said, don't worry, my guys I know down in Belgrade will help me do the magic. So the story of Verisec actually started 7 years earlier as a reseller. Back in 2002, we started as a reseller of products from RSA and SafeNet and other big vendors. And the big boom came when we approached the Swedish banks in helping them with provisioning of hardware tokens for their customers, which were becoming a big headache for them. So they came up with a solution and quite rapidly became a market leader within this area in the Nordic region, and we still are, and we manage about 1.5 million units a year and distribute to over 100 countries around the world. But during this time, the founders were having a vision of digital identities on a larger scale. They saw that cloud services were coming, they saw that web services were becoming a part of our everyday life, and that we needed a secure digital identity that could reach beyond the fixed password. And even though they were experts at managing hardware token, they realized that hardware tokens were not exactly the answer for the future, because you can carry around a token for each hardware or for each web service that you use. That would require quite a big bag. of tokens. I'm sure you all know how many passwords you manage on a daily basis. And the idea was to create something in the area of Identity 2.0, or user-centric digital identity, as some of you may have heard of. And this was not a new concept that they come up with. The discussion about Identity 2.0 has been around as long as the internet has been around. And for those of you who are not familiar with it, it's like the passport in the real world. You have one document that is issued by a credible issuer, in our case it's the Swedish government, and that grants you access to most countries in the world. Instead of having one passport for each country you go to, meaning that if you would go to Spain, you would have to get a Spanish passport, or go to Serbia, would have a Serbian passport. That sounds like a really stupid idea, right? But that's what's going on the internet today. You have one digital identity for all of your web services. For each cloud service, you have a login, you have a password that you need to manage. And the big problem is not that it's a very big hassle to manage all of these passwords for me as a user. The big problem is that fixed passwords are insecure. They're breached all the time. You can't put really valuable transaction and trust in something that is protected just by a fixed password. So there is a need for something to come along within digital identity. And our founders at Verisec had the vision of this. And in the UK, things were starting to happen back in 2008. And Nesha, who came from, he was born and raised in Serbia, and he moved from Serbia in '92. He's been working all around the world in different IT projects, and for the last 4 years he had been working in the UK. And he had come across the idea of the governmental initiative, where the government wanted the local councils to connect to their central services through one identity. That is, if you were an employee at the local council, you would use your credentials or your hardware token or whatever you had, logging into your local network and then access all the way up to the government services. But the problem for the local councils was that they didn't really have the technology to do this, to be compliant with the government's regulations. And the big giants like RSA and SafeNet, they didn't really have a good solution for this either. But Nesha, when he started at Verisec in 2008, just a couple of months after he had started, he had presented this idea, drafted this concept for the other owners at the company, and made that call to Salford, because Salford was one of the trailblazers in doing this government project. So they were really keen on doing a test, or at least seeing what was out there. And as you might have guessed, the meeting at Salford went very well, and they said, wow guys, this is such a brilliant solution, we will buy it from you, and we need it to be up and running by April. Okay, let's do that. So Nesha and the other guys got on the plane back home, and Nesha took the first flight down to Belgrade. And he hooked up with his contacts there, a company called Soneco, that you might know about, working with outsourcing and IT and programming and really talented people there. So he teamed up with the two of the developers, started working day and night, and did everything in their power to deliver this solution. And actually on the 17th of April 2009, they went to the server hall in Salford City Council, and they installed Freya, which they decided that the appliance would be called, after all. Installed the appliance, it kick-started and was working from day one, which was a kind of an amazing achievement. From Nesha, the other guys here in Stockholm are working with development, but very important, the two developers down in Serbia, in Belgrade, who did a marvelous job. From that point on, the installation in Salford was for about 400 or 500 users. But in a few years' time, Nesha and his development team would be looking at user groups counting in millions. And the Freya sales took off. And a lot of UK councils realized that this was an amazing solution to solve their authentication needs and solve their needs for digital identities. And the big boom came when London made a procurement. All of the 34 boroughs of London chose Freya as their technology for authentication. And things just started flying from there. We got on board a lot of corporate customers as well around the world. So Freya got a really big flying start. But it all started out at this meeting at Salford City Council. And at the same time, we were starting to develop other products, and Nesha had an idea of a key management system for banks and for payment processors, and this development also started with the team in Belgrade. So the Sonecco team grew from 2 to 5 people in a couple of years, and became, a very important part of our operations. It became kind of a core part of Verisec operations. So after a while, we realized that, we were pleased with Sonecco and with the management and everything, but we were starting to have concerns that is it really okay to have our core operations, like the product development, outsourced outside our own organization? So we decided to do a new beginning.